welcome to episode 18. It's Monday the 12th of November. I want to start out by giving a special thanks to those who've served and currently serve in the military. It's the celebration in the United States of Veterans Day today.
Hear, hear.
And, it's an interesting day. You and I were talking before we came on about the fact that as we turn the corner to the holidays, this is sort of what I always tell people is the beginning of that period where you start to get into spotty activity in the real estate market, meaning it tends to be slowing down. Then you have periods of holidays like Thanksgiving, and then you have the holidays in December. And from this point through all the way to February, we're not in that consistent run where it's as busy all the time like it was before. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. It changes a little bit. I mean, I get mostly relocations now. There's a cycle of life occurs. We're in it, and it's still busy. It's just the craziest thing. We're very busy.
It is busy. I mean, I was supposed to be out today with some clients who were going to buy in Southwest Austin, and they decided to wait till after the Thanksgiving holiday. They're a little bit behind in getting their house ready to go on the market. So I've got another relocation client coming in from Colorado that will be here the first week of December. So you're right. It does shift to something that's more akin to more serious relocation buyers. There aren't a lot of people shopping. You're certainly not going to see the volume of open houses anymore.
Well, when I do executive relocations, the most common question I get or statement that I get is, hey, I want to get to know the neighborhood a little bit first. And then they reach out and they look at their leases that are short-term, and sometimes, especially with the inventory being so low right now, they just don't want them to be short-term, so they end up committing to a longer than what they imagined term also, which kind of puts them right in the selling season for spring of next year. So it's interesting, this business, and how cycles flow. And I heard some sort of stat. 150 people a day are moving into Austin right now. I think we've talked about that before.
Well, we certainly have, and it's definitely something that we'll end up spending more time talking about, because I can tell you from personal experience with our website, since the election, which obviously occurred since we recorded last week's episode, we have seen an uptick. We'll see if it continues, where over 50% of our signups on the website are from people out of state.
Wow. Well, welcome to Austin, guys.
Well, Texas is considered a safe haven when it comes to people that are concerned about the direction of the United States. It's always been that way. It goes back to the history of the state. And, if you go back and look at how Texas was formed, there weren't really a lot of any native original Texans. They all came in from out of state. A lot of them were from Missouri and other places. They were all coming in for land grants. So it is interesting that we've always had this relocation in and this inflow of people coming into the state. I don't see that slowing down at any point in time.
I don't either. I hear immigration reforms on the top of everybody's list right now. So let's see what happens.
And I think they do need to get a good balanced plan, and we'll see what happens with that. Let's jump into the news and talk a little bit about real estate here.
Sure.
I have got a couple of articles from CNBC on the first segment of our news. First one, and this is getting right into the meat of things. They're out there, and they have come up with an article that's entitled "Housing, meaning the housing market, is still precarious in Obama's second term." And so when we look at the market, here's the good news. The first bullet point deals with that. It's a slow road to recovery, but we're at the point now where 128 of the 140 metropolitan areas or metros are up per the National Association of Realtors. Now, that's a huge increase. At the same time a year ago, there were only 39 of them were up. So if you look at the fact that almost all markets have turned up. Now, the wild card in here, if you look at it, is this is the strongest increase. So far so good, right? This is the strongest increase year over year since 2006, and everybody uses 2006 as, for the most part, sort of the cliff that the real estate market drove over, and you could see it coming. I was working in Miami, Florida in 2006, running a large office, and I remember Stephanie and I were living downtown in a high-rise tower, and we could look out, and there were probably 15 or 17 towers around us, all of which were dark. They were sold out, but they were dark. There was nobody living there. They're all speculators that bought all the units. And it was
Wow.
pretty clear that was going to be the top. There was going to be a downturn. And as we know, that condo market down there absolutely fell apart. So here's the main issues. And we'll touch on these. We're going to be talking a lot about these. You have to excuse the typo in there. The first one is fiscal cliff, not cluff. Fiscal cliff. And we know that's part of what people are talking about, the grand bargain. Speaker Boehner reached out to President Obama. They're talking about trying to get some sort of a grand bargain in place. A huge wild card, and this is something we'll be talking about as this gets closer to December 31st, is the issues as it pertains to our economy and whether we go into a recession. This is the main risk factor, bar none. There isn't another big factor. People can complain about, after the election, a number of companies announced layoffs. There were some people delaying plans. That's sort of noise compared to the fiscal cliff. And we'll have to just see how that transpires over the next 30 to 60 days. We don't have a lot of time for them to deal with that, and it's going to be a priority item. Now, there's a distressed property shift, and we know this. We've talked about it in the last couple of weeks. We're going to get into it in the next article. But the amount of distressed property is shifting. They're shifting away from foreclosures as far as unit sales in the form of short sales instead. In other words, somebody selling with lender approval prior to going into foreclosure. And then the big one, which we've been talking about for a long time, is the Dodd-Frank regulations, which have completely put a shackle around the mortgage market. It's made it difficult and impossible for home buyers to be able to move forward with mortgage financing. If that gets worse, it's going to be a big headwind for the real estate market. We know it's an issue. We've talked about it as recently as last week. We've talked about it as recently as our second episode where we got into it, where we knew that we could give an example of borrowers in the Austin market that are renting now because they can't meet all the overlays and the requirements to get financing. That hasn't changed. If it gets worse, it's going to have a representative, more difficult time for the market to actually speed up its recovery.
So what do you think that average person looks like here, Kevin? But let's spend a second for a second. You talked about the regulations. Help narrow that down to people. What are the people that are having trouble getting mortgage? Like self-employed?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one challenge for mortgage financing is the self-employed person. If you are self-employed, because quite often they try and take advantage of their situation from the standpoint of wanting to take the maximum amount of deductions, which is lowering their adjusted gross income. They don't have the ability to have that same kind of documented income. The system is set against the self-employed in favor of people who are employed by W-2 wages, and that would be the number one. The second thing is people have had gaps in employment.
Gotcha. That's a big deal now.
So, well, and let's look at it from a practical standpoint. Let's say you're in a hard-hit state outside of Texas. You could pick any one of them. There's lots of them. And so you relocate into Austin. You then have the fortune of getting picked up and employed. You now have to solve the problem of the fact that you had a gap in employment. And that sometimes it's not a big deal. Sometimes it is. It has also a dependency on whether you own a home that you've sold or not. There are a few people that can still qualify. I had a buyer in town this weekend that's buying new construction. She and her husband have gotten pre-approved at my suggestion for both homes so that they can enter into a contract with the builder. And so for them, they'll just lease their house if they can't sell it before they need to close on this one, although with the construction timeframes, they should be fine. So a lot of people can't do that. So it's I got to sell, and then I want to buy requirement. And the reason they can do it is that they have a tremendous amount of equity and cash reserves. Most people don't that are buying.
Got to have 6 months of reserves right now. Got to have the down payments of at least on condos. I'm seeing a lot of condos losing their FHA status, which means that they have to put down more money too. Those are the things that add a lot of stress to potential buyers.
They definitely do, and they knock certain people out. And if you deal with the condo, we've talked about this a few episodes ago, the FHA regulations as they pertain to warrantability and suitability for condo projects are headed the right direction. This is the good news. And so more and more projects will qualify. But what you're referring to is a regulation that's part of Dodd-Frank, and this kind of goes into the Fannie and Freddie world for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, where they want you to have 30% equity in your departing property if they're going to allow you to rent it and count the income. So I'll say it again. If you have a house in Colorado and you want to rent it and you got more than enough rent to cover your taxes, insurance, and payment, if you don't have 30% equity, they're not going to allow you to count it like you would from a cash flow standpoint. That's going to be a problem for people as well.
No, sorry to take you off track on that, though. I think that's a big deal for people, and I think that there are ways, and that agents. We should probably talk about this in the future. What if you're in that situation? How can you buy a house now? What types of properties are open for your purchases, even if you have limits? Yeah,
and we should probably talk about that because there are properties that are out there where special financing situations exist, and how do you work around some of the requirements. Let's get into the next article, which is the foreclosure discounts are drying up. This is pretty interesting. It's also on CNBC.com. And look at the difference between a year ago, September, and now. This is the difference between a retail property on average and how much of a discount there is to a distressed property, which would be like a foreclosure. It's only a 7.7% discount in September this year versus 9.1% a year ago. And this is the smallest discount that they've seen, and it's way down from where it was at the peak of the market. I mean, if you're looking at the peak of the market where you had a big gap between retail and foreclosures, there was as much as 20 or 30% discount. And I think that this is going to have a cooling effect on investor interest. Not so much in Austin, but in other markets around the country, because they're going to go move their capital around if they require a big discount. And it's also something that the small investors, and I know you get inquiries like I do around the market, they fail to understand that they're not going to go look at retail property and then say, okay, I decided I want to buy a foreclosure and see a huge discount.
Right. It's market price. I mean, that's the way it is. That's the law.
Right. And it's one of those things where banks are able, and especially in the Austin area, if it's a decent property in decent shape, the gap may be even smaller than this 7.7%. I mean, I've certainly seen some properties get bid up to close to market value, haven't you?
Yeah, I think there are different ways that different people have different limits. Like I know with the HUD homes, 7% or more, tough to get. With a corporate relocation, it would be a foreclosure. If there was just a standard Fannie Mae Freddie Mac home, I haven't seen those go for below asking in a long time, especially if they take the time and fix up the property where it's ready to move in.
You have to either have structural or condition issues that make it difficult to work with.
That's a good point.
Problems, or you have mold, or you have other issues like that. I think you might see a little bit more of a discount.
My dad used to love foundation problems. That was always the one that said scared away the most investors, but got you the best deals always.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you understand the issue and you've got a good repair firm you work with, there's plenty of houses that go through the process of having foundation issues, and they absolutely scare that typical retail buyer away. But once they're fixed and they're warranted, you're in pretty good shape.